The church was unusually quiet that morning. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across the polished wooden pews. The faint scent of candle wax lingered in the air, mixed with the soft echo of footsteps on marble floors. And there she was. Bent slightly forward, carefully wiping the last row of pews with a worn, faded cloth, her hands trembling, but precise. A woman no one noticed. Until a sharp voice broke the silence. Honestly, does she have to look like that in a place like this? Heads turned. And in that moment, without anyone realizing it, something far deeper than judgment had just been set into motion. Margaret Whitmore arrived every Sunday like a spectacle. Draped in designer silk, her heels clicking with authority, diamonds catching the morning light, she didn't just walk into the church, she owned the space. She was the wife of a billionaire investor, a woman whose name appeared in charity galas and magazine columns. People greeted her with polite smiles, some with admiration, others with quiet resentment. But Margaret didn't notice the difference. To her, respect was expected, not earned. That morning, her gaze locked onto the cleaner. An older woman, perhaps in her late 60s. Her dress was simple, slightly worn at the edges, the color faded from years of washing. A loose scarf covered her gray hair, and her shoes, well, they had seen better days. Her name was Grace. And she had been cleaning that church for over 15 years. Quietly. Faithfully. Invisibly. Grace didn't look up when Margaret entered. She simply continued wiping the pews, her movements slow but careful, as if each surface deserved respect. Margaret's lips curled slightly. She leaned toward a woman seated beside her and whispered, just loud enough, "It's embarrassing. This is a place of dignity, not a shelter." A few nearby heads turned. Grace paused. Just for a second. Then she resumed cleaning, her expression unchanged, but her grip on the cloth tightened. Grace had heard things like this before. Not always out loud. Not always so directly. But enough to recognize the tone. The dismissal. The quiet cruelty wrapped in elegance. Still, she said nothing. She never did. Because to Grace, this church wasn't just a building. It was home. Every morning before sunrise, she would arrive alone. She would light a candle, whisper a prayer, and begin her work. She polished every surface with care, as if preparing a sacred space, not for others, but for something greater. And maybe, for someone she still missed. Meanwhile, Margaret settled into her seat, crossing her legs with practiced grace. She scanned the room, subtly assessing outfits, postures, status. Her world was one of appearances. And Grace didn't fit into it. Halfway through the service, Margaret felt distracted. Her eyes kept drifting back to Grace, who was now quietly organizing hymn books near the back. Something about her presence irritated Margaret. It wasn't just the clothes. It was the calmness. As if the woman had nothing to prove. Margaret leaned toward the aisle and gestured. "Excuse me," she called softly, but firmly. Grace looked up. "Yes, ma'am." Margaret smiled, polite, but cold. "Would you mind stepping outside during service hours? It's a bit distracting." A few gasps rippled through the nearby pews. Grace blinked. For a moment, she didn't respond. Then, gently, "I'm almost finished, ma'am. Just a few more minutes." Margaret's smile faded. "I'd appreciate it if you respected the atmosphere here." The words hung heavy. Grace lowered her gaze. "Of course." She placed the hymn books down carefully, wiped her hands on her cloth, and began walking toward the exit. Each step slow. Measured. Silent. But something about the way she moved, it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like dignity. Just as Grace reached the door, "Grace." The voice echoed through the church. Deep. Steady. Familiar. It was Pastor Elijah. He had been standing near the altar, watching quietly the entire time. Now, he stepped forward. "Would you stay, please?" Grace paused. Turned. The entire congregation shifted in their seats. Margaret frowned slightly, confused. The pastor's gaze moved across the room, then settled briefly on Margaret before returning to Grace. "I think, today would be a good day for everyone to learn something." A murmur spread. Margaret straightened, her posture stiffening. Something was off. Pastor Elijah walked slowly down the aisle, his hands clasped behind his back. "Many of you see this church as a place you visit once a week," he began. "A place of worship, of reflection, perhaps even of routine." He stopped beside Grace. "But for some, it is something much more." Grace looked uneasy now. "Pastor, it's all right," she whispered. But he gently shook his head. "No, Grace. It's time." The room fell into complete silence. Margaret felt a flicker of discomfort. She didn't like uncertainty. She especially didn't like being watched. Pastor Elijah turned to the congregation. 15 years ago, he said, this church was nearly closed. A few older members nodded. The roof was leaking. The funds were gone. We were preparing to sell the building. He paused. And then, someone stepped in. Margaret crossed her arms slightly. Where was this going? Pastor Elijah gestured toward Grace. She did. The room seemed to freeze. Grace lowered her head. "No, Pastor, please," but he continued. "She didn't just clean this church. She saved it." A ripple of disbelief spread through the congregation. Margaret blinked. "That's not possible," she muttered under her breath. Pastor Elijah's voice softened. "Grace sold her home. Every possession she had. Quietly. Without recognition. And donated the money, to keep these doors open." A gasp. Someone dropped a book. Margaret's heart skipped. She looked at Grace again, but now, something felt different. "Why?" someone whispered. Pastor Elijah smiled gently. "Because this church was built by her husband." The air shifted. He passed away years ago. Before he could see it completed. Grace stayed, to take care of it. Not as an owner. Not as a benefactor. He looked around. But as a servant. Grace's eyes shimmered with quiet tears. "I didn't want anyone to know," she said softly. "I just wanted it to remain, a place of peace." Margaret felt her throat tighten. The room suddenly felt smaller. Warmer. Heavier. All eyes slowly turned, not just to Grace. But to her. The woman who had just asked this person to leave. Margaret swallowed. Her fingers trembled slightly against her designer handbag. She stood up, slowly. Her voice, when it came, was no longer sharp. I didn't know." Grace looked at her. And for the first time, she smiled. "It's all right," she said gently. But Margaret shook her head. "No. It's not." There was a pause. Then, something unexpected. Margaret stepped forward. One step. Then another. Until she stood directly in front of Grace. The entire church watched. "I judged you," Margaret admitted, her voice unsteady. "Without knowing anything about you." Silence. "I saw your clothes, and thought that defined your worth." Her eyes filled. "I was wrong." Grace reached out. Placed her hand softly over Margaret's. "It's easy to see the surface," she said. "Much harder to see the heart." The service that day felt different. Quieter. Deeper. Margaret didn't return to her usual seat. Instead, she sat beside Grace. No one spoke of status, or wealth, or appearances. Because for the first time, everyone understood something simple. That dignity isn't worn. It's lived. And sometimes, the people who seem the smallest in the room are the ones holding it together. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more stories of kindness. And if you've ever experienced a moment like this, share it in the comments. Your words might inspire someone else.